So now we move on to this week's mailbag. Remember, these are questions and comments that you guys leave on the channel that we attempt to answer, or I put open to the floor for somebody else to try and answer. First one comes from Don DeVore. Don says, the only complaint about the X32 mixer I've heard is the sample rates are limited to 44.1 and 48 kilohertz. It does not do 96 kilohertz. Not sure, but I think the new Behringer Wing does. In response to Mailberg, I did right at the beginning of January actually about sort of what mixers. So I was sort of justifying why I bought the Mackie FX Pro for this sort of use. And the answer is, well, to be honest, I've been giving this some thought and I've been doing some research on it. And the short answer is the Wing still only samples at 44.1 and 48 kilohertz. There's no 96 kilohertz sampling on the Wing. So you're sitting there thinking, well, the X32 is sort of the legacy, the Wing's the new, why haven't they gone up to 96 kilohertz? The long answer is that Behringer use a protocol called AES-50 for moving the digital sampled audio around the mixer. And what they've basically said is if they were to sample at 96 kilohertz, it takes up twice the resources that they've put in the mixer. Now, the mixer is beefier than the X32 anyway, because it has more features on it. But what they've basically said is that if they were to sample at 96 kilohertz, then the hardware can only support 24 channels rather than 48 stereo channels. And because it can't support, and they decided effectively that the market wanted a fully functional mixer with lots of channels, a good digital mixer, and they decided to restrict it to 48 kilohertz to give the market what the market are asking for. And this comes back to what Behringer keeps saying, give the people what they want, rather than take it up to 96 kilohertz and only be able to deliver a mixer that has 24 channels, which is less than the X32 has on it at the moment. So there you go, that's the answer. In terms of my personal preferences, I did a lot of thought about what my preferences are. Do I need a 96 kilohertz sampling mixer? And the answer is I do not. So therefore, the Wing still stands firmly in my field of vision in terms of when I come to look at that part of the studio when I eventually rebuild the studio later this year. So for my purposes, 48 kilohertz is more than enough for what I want to do. So the next one comes from Shadow Henge, and he writes, in response to the Roland MX-1 video I did on using ARIA via USB to the MX-1, that was August 2019 I did that video, and he writes, can you feed MIDI in via the 5-pin DIN, say from an external sequencer, and feed that out through the USB ports to devices connected via USB? I've heard this is a major hang-up on the MX-1's USB. And I'm going to say, in short, the answer is no. Well, put it this way, I can't work out how to make it work. So I can't work out how to route MIDI from the DIN sockets to the USB sockets in the in the MX-1. It doesn't have a routing capability to allow you to do that, as far as I can see. Doesn't mean it doesn't work. Doesn't mean it wouldn't work if they released some firmware that would make it work. But somehow I think that it needs some sort of, I don't know, external interface to allow you to set the routing up. To say, take channel 1 off MIDI and route it through to channel 1 on the USB ports. That I can't see how to do that. There is an exception, and the exception is the time source. The time source seems to work. So if you have your MX-1 set up to a time source that is being received via the MIDI, then anything is downstream of the MX-1 via USB or via MIDI receives the same time code. Now I think that's probably something to do with the fact that they're receiving their time code from the MX-1, and the MX-1 is receiving its time code from the external source that's coming in via MIDI, rather than the time code is being routed. Okay, I think that's probably how that's working, but I can't see how to route from one to the other. I think, as I said, I think it's probably going to need something like a routing interface, aka akin to the iConnectivity routing interface, where effectively you get all the USB ports, you get all the MIDI ports, and you can effectively say route from this USB to that MIDI port and route from this MIDI port to that USB port. That is available on their interface, but I can't see anything like that on the MX-1. So for the time being, unfortunately, the way you're going to have to manage devices downstream with the USB, if you're taking in a MIDI signal via DIN, is to effectively run that same MIDI source into the downstream devices, or get an interface like an iConnectivity, plug them all into that interface, or plug the source into that interface, and then effectively have all the others fed off it, so you don't get latency on a daisy chain. Hopefully that answers that question. The next one comes from my friend Bruce. And it's in response to a video I did 2 years ago, January 2018. And admittedly, this response is a while ago because this comment was left a year ago. So, bear in mind, but I think it still has relevance. John, I too have health issues, so that was me talking about the fact that I've been in hospital. I need not say it is important to be with supportive people, and I can't agree more with that after what I said last week on the rant. On the hard drive issue, I agree with one addition. Always have a second archive data in another location, not even in the same building, a completely different place. We had fires in California which destroyed music studios. So, this demonstrates something that us musicians are probably particularly poor at. And I say poor, I would actually use the word poor, to be honest. In that we very rarely back things up to somewhere else. With the cloud coming along, the cloud is great. You can back stuff up to the cloud as long as you pay your subscription. You can always get to it. If you stop paying your subscription for some reason, guess what? You can't get to your data. So my advice is always to have a second device. Now, Bruce is referring to the fact that 2 years ago in California, they had massive wildfires in sort of the northern Los Angeles kind of area. Bruce, I know where Bruce lives in California, and he's surrounded by all of these sort of music studios and art studios and film studios and whatever. So, I can see him talking from personal experience about where these things happen. So, a lot of these sort of famous music studios are hidden away in the hills in Northern California, and they were completely obliterated by fire. So that's kind of where it's coming from. If you think about this year, just before Christmas, we had all those wildfires in Australia, wiping out hundreds of hectares of land, just burning through. And where they hit a property, the property just went up in smoke. Now, if they had, your creative, your full creative soul was in there and you hadn't backed it up, I would think about now you'd be sitting there being quite gutted. So the answer is you need to back up your creativity somehow. You need to have a routine for doing it, and you need to be quite disciplined about backing up your creative works, because believe you me, if you were to lose them, and even doing simple things like I've done in the past, which is overwrite the disc. I can remember I did a song many years ago, and I loved this song. It was a great song, and it was written completely off the cuff with a group of friends, and it was all sequenced up, and it was all held on a floppy disk, and I overwrote the floppy disk, not realizing that it wasn't right protected. So even stupid things like that, I didn't have a second copy of it, and it was one lesson well learnt, because I struggled to put the thing back together again in the same format. The first try was the best, and the first try was the one that was lost. Yes, equipment can be replaced, but your creative works sometimes can't. And the final one for this section, from Little G. And this was in response to TR8 update gone wrong, System 1, M1 PCM card maintenance. that I did in January this year, just recently. And they write, I wish Roland could develop a firmware update system like Behringer, which is very, very simple and quick. I always feel like I'm about to accidentally detonate a nuclear weapon when updating modern Roland gear. It's too risky. And I completely agree. I do not understand why Roland has gone down this updater route that it seems to have gone down. It seems utterly bonkers that it's not some sort of interface on the machine that actually does all the hard work for you rather than you having to copy files around. But we are where we are. Having said that, I have had a real interesting time updating the Behringer, to the point where I haven't updated the Behringer firmware. I actually sat down to do a video about this about 2 weeks ago, and I ran into a lot of problems. And I ran into problems with effectively the updater on my computer just hanging, and I could not work out what was going on with this. And it took me quite a while to work out what was going wrong, effectively by sort of humming through the user groups and what have you. And it comes down to the fact that Behringer have released the updated firmware version, and at the same time what they've done is they've deleted the version revision notes. What they've done is they've published a set of notes in an Excel spreadsheet which tells you what bugs have been fixed, but what they haven't done is they haven't published the sequencing of how you do the update. Now I've done, or just about to do the update, should I say, I know how simple it is. But up until that point in time, what I was kind of thinking was I was missing a step, in that I was trying to do the update, and it was like the RD-8 wasn't in a position to accept the update. And so I was sitting there thinking, well, there's a sequence I probably need to do on the RD-8 to put it into like a receive mode, which is sort of kind of the same as all the other pieces of firmware updating you do from a computer. You put something on your computer and then you put the piece of equipment into a receive mode, and then the computer sees it and it throws down the update, and Bob's your uncle, it's all done. And I wasn't seeing that. So going back and doing a bit of searching around the internet, I have found the firmware instructions for the October update they did. And in that, it clearly says, in step, it says, put your RD-8 into receive mode. And this is how you do it. Now you do it in receive mode. Now you put it into receive mode. Yes, it is simple. But you've got to get it into receive mode first. And that was the bit that's missing. So, hopefully, I will do that shortly, and everything will work. And if it all works, jolly good. There will be a video up on the website that says this is how you do it, and this is how you put the unit into receive mode to be able to do it. Come on, Behringer, this is a schoolboy error. You know, not publishing the update notes with the release. I suspect it's something to do with the fact that the release was rushed out and somebody forgot to either add it into the zip file or add it as a set of notes on the update section of the Music Tribe website. Either way, next time, don't forget. If you liked the content of the video you've just seen, please give it a thumbs up. It just helps the YouTube algorithm with its selection process. If you want to leave a comment, please feel free to do that as well. Down below somewhere should be the ability to do that. I do try to respond to all the comments that are raised on the channel. Sometimes it takes me a few weeks because of what I'm doing, and I'm getting more and more comments and questions raised on the channel, so it just takes sometimes a little bit of time to do a bit of research. If you want to be notified when I put more rants, mailbergs, and videos about this sort of legacy tech and even modern tech on the channel, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell icon, and you'll be notified by YouTube when stuff happens. I try to publish at least 2 times a week, sometimes more, sometimes less. Until next time, bye-bye.